As gas prices rise, and the cost of even just living forces the average citizen to live paycheck to paycheck, we all wonder, why is everything going up in price? Well, we're barely able to make scraps. Living continually becomes harder for the average American, but then how are billionaires hitting new highs? It's a common question for almost all of the 300 million Americans living in the U.S. as of 2026. And while all this is going on, politics have never been less stable. This has been on pretty much everyone's minds. While sometimes over-exaggerated, it is mostly true. As of 2026, the ratio of the average price of a house in comparison to the average salary is 7.14, meaning a house is 7.14 times the average income, and for lower incomes, it just becomes worse and worse. None of this is even considering the fact that these people have to pay for food, water, and other necessities, taking the amount they have to put towards a house. The idea of buying a house and having zero debt is pretty much a pipe dream for individuals now, and even just buying a house at all. For some perspective, at the peak of the 2008 housing crisis, the ratio was 6.78, and before the crisis, the ratio was only 4.04, making our current ratio almost double. So why is this all happening? What is the wage gap, and how does it affect you? The wage gap affects almost everyone, and most certainly you are a part of it. It's not just a small portion of the population. The bottom 50% of Americans, quite literally half of the American population, only gets 2.5% of the money generated in the US, which, if it was split evenly, only leaves $24,000 per person as a reality for 179 million Americans. And even for the bottom 90%, meaning the majority of Americans, it only accounts for 31.7% of the wealth, leaving the top 10% with 68.3%. That's over $119 trillion every year. And the top 1%, they make up 31.9% of all the wealth. Because of how bad it was, people began studying the wage gap. In this one particular study, they asked what people thought about where the wage gap was, and they presented this graph, where they thought about the wage gap was. The bottom still had plenty of money, and the rich were still up there, but unfortunately, this couldn't be more off. This is the actual graph, where the amount of money the richest people make is so high that it goes off the old charts. All of this to point to the fact that the average CEO makes 380 times what the average American worker makes, meaning they make more than your salary in a singular day, and that's not even considering lower wage workers, where they make 2 to 4 times their salary. All of this while the average citizen can't even afford a house and can barely afford to get by. In fact, over 92 million people living in the U.S. don't even have insurance. That's a quarter of all Americans. So, what do you do when you're living in America and need money? Do what people did before, go to college. But it's different now. Finding a job with that fancy new $100,000 degree has become harder and harder, and with that, it's almost impossible to pay a loan back. And it's at the point where it's not just the quality of life, but life itself that is damaged. Without access to good healthcare, or just worse healthcare than the wealthy, the average non-wealthy person lives 15 years less than the average wealthy American. And if you think it's always been this way, it's not. If the wage gap had stayed the same from 40 years ago, the average American would be earning $42,000 more each year. And that's the equivalent of having an additional $20 an hour. So how do the hyper-rich do it? How are they managing to make all of this money? I mean, you think their taxes would be crazy, right? But that's just the thing. They barely even pay taxes. By using shell companies called pass-throughs, they funneled over $1 trillion in 2019 alone. $1 trillion that would have gone to the American people. $1 trillion stolen. And on top of that, they pay their workers just enough to keep up with inflation, while increasing their own profits by playing the system like a fiddle, and then scooping up all the consumer resources like semiconductors and RAM. They fund massive AI programs that all just funnel back into each other and prioritize investor money. Then those same AI programs pour billions into and take jobs from actual workers. It's to the point where jobs like computer programming are projected to go down in workers by 6% over the next 10 years, and writers and even some artists are getting fired at rates unseen before ever. How? Because AI is cheaper and faster, and workers can barely fight back as companies continually prevent or attempt to stop people from joining unions. So, how do we fix it? Attempts have been made in the past to resolve the wage gap and the economic crisis in the U.S. Clearly they haven't worked, so what did they do, and how can we really learn from it? First of all, strikes and boycotting. It is an age-old strategy, and it has led to better pay, but informing with worker unions creates great results, but it's just, unfortunately, this isn't as common as it needs to be, or as it should be. It's become harder and harder to get that strength in numbers when everyone tends to be separate entities, but people are angry enough to burn down millions of dollars of products and kill CEOs even. but we need to direct that energy correctly. So instead of risking lives, we can build up others. And one way we can do this, and have been doing it, is equity services for the less fortunate. But those services are limited by the supply of money funneling into the US. If only there was some way to get more money, right? Well, there actually is, but before I tell you, I need you to understand something going into this. And as important as fixing the system and fixing the wage gap is, fixing the dividedness of the United States is just as important. Yes, I'm talking about the Republican and Democratic division. I would go as far to even say this is the primary problem in the US. Not only is the political spectrum broad, but also extremely different. Someone could be a Republican but have almost completely different beliefs from another Republican. Same with Democrats. But it's just too common for someone from one side to assume the other to be a terrible person or to lump them in with some group that only represents part of their party. It's to the point where I've seen friends of several years and people dating for several years just stop because they were on the opposite party. It's crazy. This divide has been warned about us for centuries too. I mean, the first person in the United States even warned about it in his farewell address. Quote, "I have already intimated to you the danger of parties in the state, with particular reference to the founding of them on geographical discriminations. Let me now take a more comprehensive view and warn you in the most solemn manner against the baneful effects of the spirit of party generally." Unquote. Perfectly predicting what has happened in the US today. And it's not even just that Americans are inherently bad or, oh, this side's bad either. Like, it's not any of that. It's just basic human biology and nature. There's a bias in human nature called in-group favoritism bias that has been shown again and again in politics. It's simply that if you are part of a group, it's often that you will get back up and you'll back up someone even if you don't necessarily agree with them, which in the wild was extremely useful. Like, it was an extremely useful asset because sticking together was very important. But it's become an issue when it comes down to politics, and this has been seen all over American politics, with Republicans and Democrats being historically enemies, even all the way back to the Civil War. And I'm sure if you experience it yourself, this is extremely damaging to politics. There are issues that I can guarantee you both sides are agreeing, such as the cost of living, but rather than working with each other, we just end up as separate sides. And the focus becomes on issues that we can't agree on. And without unity, we can't fix the tax code, we can't fix the living situation of millions of Americans, and we can't change any of this, ever, period. It just creates more unnecessary problems. We're supposed to be Americans, not left-wing or right-wing. We're just supposed to be one bird. But why would I want you to understand this, right? It doesn't really seem relevant. But if I'm being honest, no matter how good the solution is, even if my solution right here was golden, which is probably, I think it's okay, but it might not be the perfect solution. But even if there was a perfect solution, we probably couldn't get it passed if we're not together. And that's why, and because I actually want to make a difference with this, I need you to understand that without fighting together, we cannot change the system. We need to work together. So while this section has been a tangent, I felt like I did need to discuss it. Now, how do I propose we fix it? Well, I would start by fixing what is, in my opinion, the primary issue in America today, other than the political divide, which is the tax code and the billionaires' loop. We need to start taxing total income instead of having all these little write-offs and all these ways that billionaires and even now trillionaires can bypass the taxes. Not billions, not millions, trillions of dollars. See, if we were allowed to actually do that and we actually tax the money that they were hiding from us, we would be able to fund a bunch of programs that would make living easier for millions of Americans. For example, universal healthcare. And before you would ever, this would not only prevent 26,000 deaths, but millions of injuries, and we could also help cancer patients who can't pay off that money because they don't have enough money. Cancer sometimes costs millions to fix, and we could also increase the lifespan of millions of other Americans. As well, we could also provide education, better education, as well as things like free lunches for all students and free post-high school education as well. I mean, as of 2025, we only spent 2% on the education system while spending trillions on the military and better schooling. We could keep increasing the rate of students passing high school, as well as providing better programs to help kids become better students and better members of society, while decreasing the average crime rate with it. Then, with free college and university, this not only incentivizes the average American to actually go to college and learn, but also increases the average income of the average citizen heavily. With that, we can have smarter Americans, less deaths, less prison sentences, less malnutrition kids, easier access to resources for kids without homes, and millions of lives saved.